U-PASS has a mission to assist all pilots in safety and standards. The following video will help you understand what it means to get a 137 and the time it will take. Precision agriculture is transforming farming, and becoming an agricultural UAS or drone pilot in the US involves regulations. In this video, we will explain the terminology, forms, and licensing, giving you a better understanding of the expectations from both the FAA and state departments of agriculture. All the forms we will reference can be found on the front page of the U-PASS site under Federal Compliance, about 3/4 down the page. It may help to open a second tab to easily switch back and forth for examples, to understand each form and step in getting your 137. Before we jump into the 137 requirements, let's review definitions so as a pilot you know where to find these rules and regulations. First, the Federal Aviation Regulations are rules created by the FAA which governing all aviation activities in the United States. Title 14 is one of the 50 titles that make up the Code of Federal Regulations and includes the aeronautics and space rules and regulations issued by the Department of Transportation and FAA. Title 14 also oversees UAS, so all things drone will fall under the Title 14 CFR. So let's get started. In order to fly a drone under the FAA's Small UAS Rule 14 CFR Part 107, you must obtain a remote pilot certificate from the FAA. This certificate demonstrates that you understand the regulations, operating requirements, and procedures for safely flying drones. Eligibility includes be at least 16 years old, able to read, speak, write, and understand English, be in a physical and mental condition to safely fly a drone, and pass the initial aeronautical knowledge exam known as the Unmanned Aircraft General. Additionally, 107 pilots must complete an online recurrent training every 24 calendar months to maintain aeronautical knowledge recency. Next, Class 3 medicals. 14 CRT 61, 23A, 2 and 61.3C. One state that over 55 pounds UASs require an additional relief to be necessary. A Class 3 medical conducted by an aviation medical examiner or AME who are trained in evaluating airmen for general health, substance, or alcohol-related conditions or other mental conditions. Now let's talk about the exemptions. A petition for exemption is a request to the FAA by an individual or entity for relief from the requirements of a regulation in Title 14 CFR. Because most agricultural drones are over 55 pounds, they must apply for a heavy drone created using the FAA's authority given in 49 U.S.C. Section 44807, Part 11's exemption process, and the Part 91 waiver process. This exemption must be obtained prior to applying for the 137 exemption. The 137 exemption is the final exemption needed to fly and dispense anything from an aerial drone found in Title 14 CFR Part 137. Aircraft operations are considered agricultural by nature if they dispensing any economic poison as defined in Section 137.3, dispensing any other substance intended for plant nourishment, soil treatment, propagation of plant life, or pest control, engaging in dispensing activities directly affecting agriculture, horticulture, or forest preservation. Note, the FAA considers chemicals used as disinfectants for viruses to fall in the category of economic poisons as defined in Section 137.3. Okay, this is a lot of information and not meant to get you confused or discouraged. We just want you to know where these regulations are coming from and the definitions when they are tossed around. Now let's talk about the process of getting your 137 and what that looks like. First, a 107 license. Even manned pilots are required to have a UAS Drone 107 pilot's license. There are many study options online, but pilots will need to go to a FAA testing facility to test for a 107. After testing, pilots are required to go to the IACRA FAA site and apply for the actual license. Getting your pilot card can take up to 6 weeks to get in the mail. During that wait time, if you are going to fly any drone over 55 pounds, you will be required to get a Class 3 medical. Again, this is not just any medical, but it must go through an FAA Aviation Medical Examiner. A list of those doctors can be found on the FAA site under AME Locator. Now that the pilot is ready, what does it take to have the UAS legal? Remember, anything outside Title 14 CFR 107 will require exemption or relief from those regulations. Back to the Title 14. UASs can be broken down into under 55 pounds and over 55 pounds. For under 55 pounds, pilots have less regulations, but still shadow the over 55 pounds UASs. So let's drill down on the over 55 pounds UASs. After purchasing a drone, if it's over 55 pounds, you're going to be required to file for an overweight exemption. Every drone over 55 pounds is required to fly with a 44807 exemption, regardless if it's an agriculture drone or a photography drone. This exemption does expire every 2 years and will need to be renewed. There are multiple ways to file for a 44807 exemption. Pilots do not need an attorney to file with the FAA. Pilots can try to do it themselves, but if it's filed wrong, it can delay the exemption. Some drone dealers will file for their pilots or just use the U-PASS filing process. A quick note, the FAA has added some new requirements in applying for your 44807. Now pilots must have their pilot cards with the number and have a drone N number. What is an N number? Every UAS over 55 pounds must fly under a tail number. That form is called a 8050-1, which can be found on the U-PASS site. We recommend that you reserve an N number, and that link can be found on that page as well. Then use the reserved N number on the 8050-1 form. Some drone dealers will help with this process, but the step-by-step is also on U-PASS. With all this information, pilots are now ready to apply for your 44807. Here's where it gets difficult. There is no way to know how long the FAA is going to take to process the 44807, and a pilot cannot go any further until that exemption has been granted. It was taking the FAA as little as 30 days, but it can be as long as 3 months. The final step for agriculture pilots after the 44807 has been granted is to file for the FAA 137 exemption. That filing instructions will come from the FAA directly and is a simple do-it-yourself online. This 137 exemption allows pilots to fly not just controlled chemicals, but anything that can be defined as propagating agriculture. Once the 44807 has been granted, the pilot can go online and file for the 137. Just one more thing here. Pilots may hear this exemption or that exemption is available. Additional exemptions cannot be added until you have a 44807. With that initial filing, keep it simple, don't add an exemption that is not a summary grant. Meaning, don't be the first to add something new. Currently, the FAA is granting with the initial 44807 filing the swarming, night operations, and no visual observer exemptions. Now let's talk about being state compliant. Every state is different in what the Department of Agriculture will require to hold a pesticide license. The FAA owns the air, but the state owns the land and is the governing body that issues qualified pilot licenses to dispense the chemicals onto the land. Members of U-PASS can look up their individual state's requirements as well as talk to state reps who are pilot specialists in that particular state. There is also other state-specific information about reciprocity and B-Watch in each state. If you do not want to become a member, basically, your state pesticide license will require taking a core and a category test along with an aerial applicators test. Some states do not require an aerial applicator test, and others require mentorship of hours flown before getting your applicator license. The majority of state applicators' licenses must be renewed every year. If you are only seeding or spreading fertilizer, you will not need a state pesticide license, only the FAA 137. Finally, let's address insurance. Because this technology is new, a majority of insurance companies do not cover aerial application. Before assuming it can go under any current policy, please ask the insurance agent. Aerial policies are unique in that once the drone leaves the ground and is in the air, are now not covered in the majority of blanket policies. Most states will require pilots to produce an insurance policy to get a state license, so understand the hull coverage and the crop damage limits required. The takeaway from this video is to understand the requirements to fly legally and the time it will take you personally to get through the required testing and in the air. In review, the FAA will require a 107, a Class 3 medical, and a drone number. The exemptions required are a 44807 for the overweight drone and the 137 for dispensing of chemicals for crops. The state requirements include an applicator's license and an insurance policy which cover the state minimums. With the FAA and state departments working together, it is imperative that pilots are safe and compliant when using this technology. The process is not hard, but it does take time. Whether you are a current farmer with a state pesticide license wanting to fly, or a pilot wanting to start distributing chemicals, or neither and just wanting to get into the business, there is a pathway and U-PASS can guide you step by step. Become a U-PASS member and get involved. Pilots across the country are coming together to learn best practices and guiding this industry in safety and standards.